boy, this one is shaping up to be a banger. What's good? It's Woog. We have Serhii Bohachuk, 24 wins and 1 loss, defending his WBC interim 154-pound champ status, defending that against Vergil Ortiz Jr., 21 wins and 0 losses. All of Vergil Ortiz Jr.'s 21 wins have come via knockout, and 23 of Bohachuk's 24 wins have come via knockout. The only one that went the distance for Bohachuk was in his very last fight, where he brutalized and just bludgeoned Brian Mendoza. And Bohachuk wasn't even supposed to be fighting Mendoza. He was supposed to be fighting Sebastian Fundora. Fundora got the call up to fight Tim Tszyu for the title when Keith Thurman had to pull out of the fight, and then they slid Brian Mendoza in against Bohachuk on late replacement. A lot of people forget about that before Brian Mendoza took that beating against Bohachuk, because remember, the 3 fights leading up to that fight against Bohachuk for Brian Mendoza were a knockout win over Jason Rosario, a huge upset knockout win over Sebastian Fundora. That was a big upset. And then that got Brian Mendoza a title opportunity against Tim Tszyu, and Brian Mendoza, fought competitively, lost a rough decision against Tim Tszyu. So again, Bohachuk was supposed to fight Fundora. They made Brian Mendoza a late replacement, and then Bohachuk put a pretty bad beating on Brian Mendoza. Meanwhile, Vergil Ortiz, instead of fighting Serhii Bohachuk here, he was supposed to be fighting Tim Tszyu a week ago. But Tim Tszyu, because of that cut that he sustained against Fundora that was due to that elbow, Tim Tszyu's cut hadn't recovered enough for him to be okay to fight Vergil Ortiz. So he had to pull out of that one, and then they scheduled this Bohachuk versus Vergil Ortiz Jr. fight. So Vergil Ortiz, I have long thought, was one of the most sensational young talents in all of boxing. His offensive arsenal and the ferocity of his punches, for me, have made him must see every time he steps in the ring ever since he beat Mauricio Herrera back in 2019. I know that he had featured on the Triple G versus Canelo the first 2 fights. He was featured deep on the undercard, but I first really took notice when he beat the brakes off of Mauricio Herrera in 3 rounds. He stopped him. And you know how you could tell sometimes when the guy has like just an unusual amount of zip on his punches? I just thought that there was a different level of intensity in Vergil's punches, punch for punch. Like in the first round, I was thinking, I don't know how Mauricio Herrera survives this. And ever since that, every time you see Vergil Ortiz in the ring, this guy punches like he's just trying to beat the piss out of you. His body attack is sickening, and he's got a very good jab. So he was beating up and stopping the likes of Antonio Orozco, Brad Solomon, Samuel Vargas, just, incremental step-ups. And then he had 2 significant step-ups against Maurice Hooker and then against Mean Machine, Kavaliauskas. The Maurice Hooker fight was pretty fun because Hooker likes to throw a lot of punches too. In fact, I thought that Hooker stung Vergil Ortiz with some of those shots up top. But Ortiz, like he did in the following fight against Mean Machine, he responds to getting blasted by just doing more blasting. And we're gonna talk about that and whether that approach or that response is eventually gonna backfire on Vergil Ortiz, but it hasn't to this point. And let's talk a little bit about the Mean Machine fight, because Mean Machine, I believe, should have been credited with the knockdown. I believe it was in the 2nd round. He caught him with a right uppercut as Ortiz was coming in, caught him super cleanly, followed it up with 1 more punch. Vergil Ortiz started to get really wobbly. They exchanged a couple of more times. Vergil Ortiz went down while throwing a punch, and it was credited, or rather ruled, a slip. But then that makes me think, if that was a slip, because Vergil Ortiz was clearly on shaky legs, and yes, he did throw a punch and hit the canvas, but he would not have hit the canvas had he not been badly hurt just the moment just prior to that. So if that's ruled a slip, then I would advise any boxer who just got hurt to throw a haymaker wild punch and fall down, because it'll, 1, buy you time, and it's not going to be ruled a knockdown. So why wouldn't everybody, when they start getting wobbled and hurt, just throw a wild punch that's going to look like it threw them off balance, and you could legitimately hit the canvas and then say, well, it wasn't a direct reaction to getting punched, you know, like saying that the punch didn't directly lead to the knockdown because there was a moment before that and you were probably going to go down at some point, but you instead threw a wild punch that, yeah, took you off your feet. So yeah, I just don't think that the logic holds on calling that a non-knockdown. Again, it was either the second or the third round. So then in the following round, Vergil Ortiz got hurt badly again. He was shaken up, he went back into the ropes, took a couple more shots, and then he threw a 1-1-2 jabs, a right hand, and then a left kind of hookish jab on top of that. He caught Mean Machine with the third and fourth punch in that combination. Mean Machine goes down. And right there, the fight was turned around. And then Vergil Ortiz started to pull away, ended up dropping Mean Machine multiple more times, stopped him in the 8th round. That still might be Vergil Ortiz's best win to date. So then he has a fight scheduled against Michael McKinson. He has to pull out of the fight. They have to reschedule it. They end up fighting basically like a year after the Mean Machine versus Vergil fight because of the postponement. So that fight takes place. Michael McKinson is a pretty crafty fighter. He's somewhat slick, pretty good defensively. He, you know, uses the ring, moves around pretty well. So it actually took Vergil Ortiz 9 rounds to finish McKinson, but he got the job down. And again, that's another stoppage. McKinson, by the way, has 4 wins since that knockout loss or stoppage loss to Vergil Ortiz. So that is still Michael McKinson's only loss to date. Then they started scheduling Iamantis Stanionis versus Vergil Ortiz Jr. because Stanionis had beaten Radza Butayev to become a lesser champion. I believe the lesser WBA champion. Stanionis has to pull out of the fight first. They have to reschedule it because he has to get a appendectomy, and then they reschedule it. And then Vergil Ortiz gets sick again with the same flare-up of rhabdomyolysis that forced him to postpone his fight with McKinson. So then they reschedule the Stanionis versus Ortiz fight for a second time. Stanionis pulls out the first time, Vergil Ortiz pulls out the second time. They've got another date. And then just around a week, or just over a week maybe, but around a week prior to the fight, Vergil Ortiz has to pull out again because he passes out again due to his rhabdomyolysis. He's hospitalized. It sounds like it was a pretty serious situation, so they have to scrap the fight. Stanionis versus Vergil Ortiz once again. Vergil Ortiz then goes up to 154. He's had 2 fights since. Both of those 154-pound fights have only gone 1 round. Neither of those fights have made it into the second round. So there is still a lot of question on whether Vergil Ortiz, well, it looks like his punching power is carrying. Whether he could take a solid 154-pound shot and how well he could take it, it's yet to be determined because he hasn't had a formidable opponent at 154 yet. Not to say that Thomas Delorme, at certain points of his career wasn't a formidable fighter, but you know, this version of Delorme that fought Vergil Ortiz at 154, yeah, he shouldn't have been there in the ring with him. So with that very limited sample size at 154, they then schedule Tim Tszyu versus Vergil Ortiz Jr. But again, Tim Tszyu eventually has to pull out because that cut hadn't healed. And Vergil Ortiz, by the way, in an interview said that even when they made the fight, he had a good feeling that that fight was not going to go down. He was questioning whether that cut for Tim Tszyu has healed. So he said that he only kind of half believed that the fight was even going to take place. So then they replaced Tim Tszyu with Serhii Bohachuk, and they moved the fight a week later. So instead of taking place on the Riyadh season card, Crawford versus Madrimov, this fight, Bohachuk versus Vergil Ortiz Jr., has its own date, August 10th. And Serhii Bohachuk, man, this is going to be a really good fight because Bohachuk, I mean, you look at the way that he was kind of building his reputation, right? Just a bunch of knockouts. He was 18-0 with 18 knockouts. Then he fights Brandon Adams on one of those, what was it, Box USA, Ring USA cards. This was in March of 2021. It's a good fight between Bohachuk and Adams. Adams, you might remember, lost to Jermall Charlo. You know, that was one of Jermall Charlo's 160 title defenses. So it's a competitive fight that Bohachuk is winning. Bohachuk is winning this fight until the 8th round, where mid-exchange in close quarters, Brandon Adams throws a left hook, catches Bohachuk super cleanly. And then you see Bohachuk take like a wide step back. You can see that he's super wobbly. Then he starts to cover up and tries to hold. He covers up, starts taking a couple more shots, goes back into the next rope, and he's got the high guard, but he's not defending super intelligently. And then Brandon Adams throws a punch low, and then he throws a hook high. That hook up top just cleaned Bohachuk up, knocked him down badly, and he barely beat the 10 count, but when he did get up, he was still super wobbly. The ref called it off. It was a stunning TKO knockout for Brandon Adams over Serhii Bohachuk, who again looked like he was on his way to winning that fight. Now, Bohachuk wasted like no time. He was back in the ring like 3 months later, so he kept a pretty active schedule, fought 2 more times in 2021, fought only once in 2022, fought twice in 2023. A couple of his opponents were Patrick Eloti and Nathaniel Gallimore, but then the 6th fight back was against Brian Mendoza. Again, it was supposed to be Bohachuk versus Sebastian Fundora, which on its surface, I mean, that fight I thought was going to be a very interesting fight. Fundora instead fights for the titles, and Brian Mendoza is the late replacement. So, you know, I was wondering how Bohachuk was preparing for Sebastian Fundora. I would imagine that he's preparing to fight against somebody who's willing to throw 80 to 100 punches around. So Bohachuk, you know, was going to be in really good shape because of the opponent that he was preparing for. So when you kind of reanalyze, because yeah, we saw Mendoza take that beating. He was competitive for the first 3 or 4 rounds, and then, you know, it was just a downpour of activity that started to overwhelm Mendoza. He was looking to counter cleanly, and he still had his moments in the middle rounds and late rounds here and there, but the vast majority of each of those rounds is pretty much dominated by Bohachuk's hard punching activity. So, you know, I wonder if Brian Mendoza regrets taking that fight on short notice, because it just doesn't seem like he was prepared to fight the type of fight that Bohachuk was determined to now fight. So Mendoza went the distance. I mean, he's a tough dude. He went the full distance against Tim Tszyu. But I do wonder how this last fight against Bohachuk, as well as the Tim Tszyu fight before that, how those back-to-back fights are going to impact Brian Mendoza's career going forward. But you watch Bohachuk and the way that he fights, he sticks that long jab out there. By the way, he's about 6 feet. Vergil Ortiz is about 5'11". But I don't know, I kind of take that one with a grain of salt because, you know, he used to be listed at 5'10", right? And I think on BoxRec, he still is listed at 5'10". Not only that, but, you know, whereas Bohachuk, his reach is 73 inches on paper at least, Vergil Ortiz, through most of his career, was listed reach-wise at 70 inches and 71 inches. So like on BoxRec, it was 70 inches. But then, you know, before Vergil's fight with Mean Machine, they had him listed as a 71-inch reach. But now when you look at Wikipedia, it says 74 inches. So I would also take that 74-inch reach with a grain of salt. I just feel like Bohachuk's, you know, measurables have been more consistent over time. But yeah, you see how Bohachuk fights. He'll stick that long jab out there, he'll close range, and for a tall fighter like Sebastian Fundora, he would rather fight up close than at range. I mean, he can fight at range very well, but he seems to overwhelm his opponents when he gets in closer. He starts throwing uppercuts. He'll still throw a laser, an absolute missile of a right hand, and then he'll mix in left hooks and uppercuts. So he likes to really start throwing 3 to 4 punch combinations as he gets closer. And then if you move away from him, he's going to come in with a kind of a high guard and then stick that jab out there to once again close range and to let more punches go. And again, these aren't pity pat punches. These are very hard, meaningful punches. So how do I see Bohachuk versus Vergil Ortiz Jr. shaping up? Well, these guys have sparred several rounds. Vergil Ortiz said that they sparred roughly 50 rounds together. The first time when Bohachuk was helping Vergil Ortiz prepare for Mean Machine. And then again, when Vergil had that short stint with Manny Robles. Remember when he left Robert Garcia and then went with Manny Robles, which Vergil Ortiz also has his dad, Vergil Ortiz Sr., in his corner. But he left Robert Garcia to work with Manny Robles while he was working with Manny Robles, who is Bohachuk's trainer. Manny Robles was also Andy Ruiz's longtime trainer, but Robles, who trains Bohachuk, that was the second instance that Vergil Ortiz got a lot of rounds sparring with Bohachuk. And Vergil Ortiz describes those rounds as very exciting, interesting, competitive, where they both had their moments. Now, I don't know if he's being diplomatic and nice about it, or if these were really kind of 50-50 or at least very close and competitive sparring matches. But when I look at both of these guys' styles and I think about their vulnerabilities, again, with Vergil, it is that once he gets hit, he starts coming head over skis and starts coming at you, fighting fire with fire, indulging you. You hurt him, he wants to hurt you right back. Aside from that, you know, at range, when Vergil Ortiz is sticking that hard jab out there and, you know, doing his boxing, he's got improving and pretty good head movement, but it's not great head movement. Like, I see him get stuck with a lot of jabs, and I see him get stuck with straight right hands. At range, at distance, because his head is right here. And I mean, he'll do certain dips here and there. And again, I think he's getting better, but we haven't seen a big enough sample size in his last 2 fights. Plus, when he's trying to hunt somebody down, like he had to hunt down Michael McKinson, who was staying away from him, you don't really see what the head movement is as much, because he's more, he didn't respect McKinson's power. So he wanted to come at McKinson, wanted to cut the ring off, and he was more focused on doing that than he was about slipping a lot of McKinson's shots. So I wonder where his head movement is at this stage of his career. He said that he's been working on defense for like the past couple of years, working intently on his defense. We'll see in this fight against Bohachuk, because Bohachuk, again, has a hell of an offensive arsenal. Both of these guys have crazy offenses. Bohachuk's biggest vulnerabilities, as I see it, is when he comes into range, right? First of all, at range, at long distance, I look at him as being like a B-level boxer, right? He's not like an A-level boxer. He's a pretty good boxer at range. But again, it's the pressure, it's the volume, it's the hard shots, it's closing the distance, and then fighting in the phone booth, throwing those very meaningful, skilled, hard punches. But when he comes in and he's at mid-range, because he's letting his hands go, yes, he does try to keep a high guard, but as he's throwing those punches, you've got a lot of opportunities to catch him mid-exchange if you could kind of hook with the hooker, if you will. I mean, that's how Brandon Adams caught him. Brandon Adams was kind of like just letting the downpour come down, and then he selected a moment to just whip with a left hook, and he caught him super cleanly. That was the beginning of the end for Bohachuk. So again, mid-exchange, in close range, there would be opportunities. So both of these guys have excellent jabs, and just like I wanted to see how the jab battle between Vergil Ortiz and Stanionis would play out, I'm very curious to see who kind of controls the jab battle between Vergil and Bohachuk. I think that there will be moments where each guy backs the other guy up. I would be surprised if somebody, like, you know, changes their style up for this fight. Like if Bohachuk started fighting like truly a back foot style, jabbing and moving, and then making Vergil Ortiz come find him, I would be surprised. If Vergil did the same thing, I would be surprised. I'm curious who's going to be doing the subtle coming forward and who's going to be doing the subtle backing up and counter punching. Both of these guys like to kind of get on that front foot, start sticking the jab out and setting up their big offense. Both of these guys like doing that, which makes this matchup so compelling. I think both of these guys at different moments of the fight are going to get hurt. I don't know if each guy's going to get knocked down, but I think that each guy's going to get buzzed. Both of these guys just throw too many punches and are relatively non-defensive for this to be a chess match without a lot of action. I think that there's going to be some back and forth action here. I tend to think that Vergil Ortiz, you know what, I would initially think that he would be more durable. I mean, because Bohachuk is the one between these guys who've been knocked out. But again, we've seen Vergil Ortiz hurt before. And although I'm assuming and hoping that Ortiz is totally 100% health-wise and that he's out of the woods in terms of the rhabdomyolysis, and he's got all of that on track, which he at least appears to at 154. Again, I don't know how he's going to take Bohachuk's power. It's Bohachuk who spent most of his career at 154. And Vergil Ortiz, although he's never gone the distance, I mean, you look at the latest that he's gone in fights, right? It was the 9th round when he stopped McKinson. It was the 8th round where he stopped Mean Machine. He stopped Maurice Hooker and Samuel Vargas in the 7th round. So it's not like once you bring Vergil Ortiz into the middle rounds that he starts just fading. His punching power appears to carry at least into the middle, into the late rounds. We haven't seen him in those rounds 10 through 12 yet, but I'm not gonna assume that Vergil Ortiz is gonna be under conditioned relative to Bohachuk for this one. I think that they're going to be at about the same place condition wise, but I think that as the fireworks commence and these guys start getting into those heated exchanges, I believe in Vergil Ortiz's punching speed a little bit more than Bohachuk's. I think that he might be a little bit crisper, and I think that his work to the body specifically might be the difference here against Bohachuk. Again, he is just super unforgiving when he goes to the body. And you look at, the way Bohachuk is built. He's kind of long and he's slim. I mean, his nickname is Flaco, skinny. So I think Vergil Ortiz is going to do more work to Bohachuk's body. Again, I think they're going to be trading jabs, trading hooks, but I think that Ortiz is going to be more deliberate to the body. And I think that he's going to start breaking Bohachuk down to where he's going to be able to set up big, clean shots up top that will ultimately be the difference here. I think that Bohachuk will start to succumb to the power of Vergil Ortiz Jr. But again, I think that Bohachuk is going to have his moments. I'm picking Vergil Ortiz, however, to win this one via stoppage. Look, I wouldn't be totally shocked if it goes the other way. Again, both of these guys can jab very, very well. Both of these guys throw mean hooks, mean straight rights, but I trust Ortiz's work to the body, and I think that he's going to be a little bit more durable once the sparks really start flying. Again, we have question marks about Vergil Ortiz, especially at 154, but I think that he's going to get the job done here against Serhii Bohachuk. I'm looking at a Vergil Ortiz stoppage between the 8th and the 10th round here. But yeah, let me know what you think about Bohachuk versus Ortiz. First of all, how much do you like this matchup? Because I was super disappointed when they canceled Tim Tszyu versus Vergil Ortiz Jr. To be honest, I thought that it might be too much too soon at 154 for Vergil. I mean, I love the matchup, but I'm just thinking like, damn, this, you've barely fought 2 rounds total at 154 and you're gonna go after Tim Tszyu? I mean, it might still be the case that Bohachuk is a little bit too much too soon at 154 for Vergil Ortiz Jr. But in this case, I think that he gets it done here against Bohachuk. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this one. And also, who should the winner of this one fight? Because, a lot of the talk right now, even though this is an interim WBC fight, meaning that the winner of this should be in line to challenge Sebastian Fundora. They still haven't made Fundora versus Spence. I don't know what's going on that side. At this point, I'm thinking it just makes the most sense to just run it back between Fundora and Tim Tszyu, given the nature and the circumstances of their first fight. Just run that one back. Why not? And then maybe have the winner of Bohachuk versus Vergil Ortiz Jr. fight Terrence Crawford, now that Crawford has beaten Madrimov. But yeah, let me know your thoughts on this one. And I just love this 154-pound division right now. I still don't know what's up with Jermell Charlo. I was recently told that he announced his comeback, but I haven't seen anything in print suggesting that just yet. I mean, I hope it's the case, but yeah, there's still Jermell Charlo if he comes back to 154. You still have Madrimov, who conducted himself very well against Terrence Crawford. You've got Erickson Lubin, Jesus Ramos, who just fought that controversial loss against Erickson Lubin. You still have Brian Mendoza, although again, I think that he might want to take some time off right around now. You have Michelle Soro, Charles Conwell, Kurbanov, who lost to Madrimov before Crawford versus Madrimov. Yeah, you've got a lot going on. And whenever Errol Spence comes back, you've got him maybe at 154. So yeah, there's a lot going on in this division. I'm liking it a lot. And this fight right here exemplifies that. So yeah, let me know your thoughts in the comments. Like the video, subscribe to the channel if you are into the fight talk. I'm Woog. Thanks for tuning in.